Okay.
All right, let's go to this church.
If we're really lucky, we'll run into the priest.
That'd be sweet.
He just recently started working on the diner just down the road.
Diner. All right.
Yeah, his whole thing is pretty much to make stuff. Oh, here's one of the signs. Can't go to the church without the frickin' sign.
This is so chopped.
Anything in you? Oh, welcome to the church.
It's pretty sweet. Wow, pretty cool.
It's pretty chill here.
That ceiling looks pretty dope too.
Yeah, I was really. I think he did a great job with the ceiling and the bannerman.
Well, where's the donation box or whatever?
You know the irony? He fucked up the donation box. That's actually what I wanted to tell you.
That's
He put
chopped.
the donation box backwards.
Classic.
So it's kind of like the honor system. And, no, and then this is the diner he just recently started to build.
It's pretty cool.
Not open just yet. But it's coming along.
Whoa, cool. Where do you stay then?
Oh, I'm just up the hill from here, right up in there.
Nice.
But I'm still working on supplies and materials. I'm not nearly anywhere near Priest has.
Yeah, I decided to live on the water this wipe so I could try to get a farm going.
Yeah. All right. You want
Just,
to go check out Ferry and see if there's anything down there to scavenge?
yeah, let's do it.
Right. Yeah, we don't know. guy. He kind of just showed up a few days ago. Hell yeah. That looks Gucci. Holy moly. A lot of spawns.
Yeah, you can tell this place hasn't been farmed in a while. Red van right next to you. What'd you say? Oh, nice.
There's one hot spot I always like to hit that typically has a green crate. It's the back of that rusted pickup.
How long did it take you to get a tier 2?
To be honest, I don't have a tier 2. I just borrow the priest. Yeah, tier 2, not me.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I just bought one from a shop like today because I can't do all the puzzles and shit as a solo.
Yeah, I don't fucking blame. You want blueberry seeds since you're starting a farm?
I already have some clones. Thank you though.
I don't know if it's still there, but I'm pretty sure there's a base near. God damn. Pretty sure there's a base nearby that has a shit ton of sulfur ore inside of it if you want to go check it out. That like got pre-rated not too long ago and now it's decaying.
Sure, let's look at.
I'm just trying to remember which one it is. Pretty sure it's this one over here. Yep, this is it. This is the place.
Oh wow.
I know, right? Yeah, Trisby told me and the priest noticed this place was decaying not long ago. But me and him really didn't have any use for the sulfur at this moment.
Yeah, this is sweet.
I think there's a crack in the upper. Yeah, right up there. Oh yeah.
Very nice.
Where to now, Uncle?
I'm not sure my inventory's totally loaded if you want to go back to your house in Depot.
Yeah, I might unload myself. Trying to see something now. Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to do a deposit run myself.
Alright, bet.
Alright, just let me know if you're dropping by ferry or anything.
Okay, bet. Hold on. Let me put a pin down on where the where's the church at? Like the coordinates again?
Church that road, right where it meets the fork.
Can you say that again?
W24 on the road. Just up the road from the merchant that you see.
Okay, I see. Okay, sweet, dude.
Yeah, brother. I guarantee if you ever come around here and you see the priest, he's pretty chill. He'll usually be wearing the entire priest outfit.
Hell yeah. Did you need any gear or like was there anything you needed?
Nah, there's no. Thank you, though.
All right, dude. Well, good meeting you, bro.
Brother, be safe.
Yeah, you too. Good luck.
Don't get jumped by that tiger on your way back.
Yeah, I might. I'll just chainsaw him to death.
Alright, brother.
And there he goes. Might never see him again. Actually, I can almost guarantee I will never see him again. Whether or not I get this loot home is another story. Oh, this zip line takes me straight to fishing. And then I can buy a boat. Because at this point, it might be the only way I survive. 15 low grade should be fine, but take some extra. Really? Yeah, I could just use that boat, but there's a fucking tiger. Should I just try it? Fuck it. Oh, safe zone. I'm not gonna get greedy. I wanted that box, that crate, but yeah, I don't care that much.
Even when I was doing the things that I did, I paid back $2 million of that money because I had to spend it. And then I eventually paid the other $500,000 back only because I felt it was right to pay all the money back.
Jorge Bear, never repaid.
I paid the money back, so there really isn't anyone sitting there saying they're out the money or that they lost money from this crime.
The Trinidad family, the Parks family, Jan Hillman, never repaid.
I repaid that $500,000, though there was no court order restitution in my sentence to do so.
September 11th, 1991, Frank Abagnale files for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. $1.6 million in personal debts legally erased, while giving speeches about paying everyone back.
As many of you know, I had absolutely nothing to do with the movie. I made no money from the movie. I was not involved in the movie.
They put me in a cap and a big coat and put me in a night scene playing a French policeman who goes up to arrest Leo in one of the final scenes of the movie.
I'm gonna show you about 40 years of lies. The receipts, they're devastating. The victims, they're real.
A lot of people say, yeah, but you know, you became a very famous thief before you were old enough to drink. You were wanted in 26 foreign countries and 50 U.S. states. Well, yeah, I did a lot of things that got a lot of attention, probably because they'd never been done before.
Frank wasn't a genius, the guy isn't charming, and he definitely was never reformed. Frank Abagnale, in my opinion, is a predator who figured out how to sell his story. And I guess we all bought it. So let me show you exactly what we paid for. 1970, Arizona State University. Frank's in his Pan Am uniform, setting up a table. He says he's recruiting stewardesses for Pan Am, and the line wraps around the building with attractive women. Now, aviation student Paul Holson watches Frank Abagnale interview every woman alone, one by one. Holson asks him, "I didn't know the pilots did any of the recruiting." And Frank's response, "Not only am I a pilot, but a doctor as well. I do everything, the interviews and the physicals." Physicals for a flight attendant job. Now, Frank tells Holson to call Pan Am headquarters in 3 weeks, and he'll have a job waiting for him. 3 weeks later, the FBI calls Paul Holson. Frank, he had stolen the uniform, he had stolen credit cards, and never worked for Pan Am, and never was a doctor. But they say he had examined every one of those women that day.
One of the girls came over, always gave them a thorough examination, sent them on their way. I was young, but not stupid.
Now, Frank tells this story today at corporate events for about $30,000. It's his best material.
When the girls came by, I always gave them a thorough examination. When the girls came by, I always gave them a thorough examination. When the girls came by, I always gave them a thorough examination, sent them on their way. I was young, but not stupid.
But Frank wasn't just targeting college kids. 1969, Frank's wearing his pilot uniform, taking a Delta flight for free, like always. He sees flight attendant Paula Parks and becomes obsessed. A Q stated he met Paula Parks in Miami, Florida, and followed up with her, contacting her at her residence. Now, that's the police version of the story, but here's what actually happened. Now, Frank calls Delta Airlines, impersonates Paula's manager, gets a hold of her flight schedule. Frank then follows her across the country. New Orleans, Washington, D.C., Miami, Florida, trying to ask her out on a date, tracking her across the country. Now, Paula's polite. She keeps saying no. But Frank keeps showing up with plastic flowers stolen from the local graveyard. Now, while the flowers had no smell, Paula remembers one smell from Frank, the smell of fear, the stress hormones in his sweat. So we got a grown man following a woman state to state, pretending to randomly bump into her. A week later in New Orleans, Frank's waiting at Paula's home airport. He's in his uniform, and this time, he's got a convertible, and he begs to drive her home. Now, Paula's exhausted and figures a pilot wouldn't do anything weird. I mean, it's the 1960s after all. So she takes the ride. In the car, she's telling him straight up, "Stop following me. She wasn't interested. This would never amount to anything." But when Frank meets Paula's parents, he turns on the charm. He says he's a TWA co-pilot. He has a Cornell degree in social work, and they're sold. Now, next week, Paula's flying, and her mom calls. Frank had come by for dinner while Paula was out on the town, and now he lives there, in Paula's childhood bedroom. Now, Paula's parents are convinced Frank is just harmless, and she tells him straight up, either Frank leaves or I don't come home. They choose Frank. Frank infiltrates everything. He speaks of Paula's brother's high school. He gets a key to the house. He's even dating Paula's cousin within weeks, taking the family to expensive dinners, buying them gifts, all with money Frank Abagnale was stealing from their family checkbook.
I wasn't willing to steal some individuals' money from them or their life savings.
But you were stealing an awful lot, $2.5 million, I believe it was, in the end.
Right, and that was more of a game.
From the arrest report, he admitted to making forged withdrawals from the Young Parks savings account. Imagine the man that followed you across the country living in your childhood bedroom. That's insane. Now, the Parks introduced Frank to Reverend Underwood to get him a job interview at LSU, to work with children. But when Frank can't even answer the most basic questions about social work, they get suspicious. They call Cornell. They'd never heard of Frank Abagnale. Reverend calls TWA, and they actually know Frank this time, but as a con man who was harassing stewardesses across the country. The Reverend calls the police, and Frank's arrested. And that's when the Parks discover he had stolen everything. Frank uses his one phone call from jail to ask the Parks family for bail money, the family whose life savings he had stolen. Now, facing 12 years of hard labor in Angola prison, Frank puts on his next performance as a man in need of psychiatric help. Now, Frank's mom writes to the Reverend, he seems to have a compulsion to write checks and is unable to stop. Frank writes to the Park family, you have showed me more love in 6 weeks than I've ever seen in my lifetime. And while the Parks think this is just another one of Frank's cons, the Reverend who had turned him in fights to get Frank this psychiatric treatment he was so begging for instead of prison. And somehow, the judge agrees. No Angola, just treatment. Frank's life had literally been saved from a 12-year prison sentence. All he had to do was just show up at the psychiatric hospital. August 1969, Frank flees the country. And the Reverend who had saved him from Angola, the mother who had begged for mercy, the family who had showed him nothing but love, and Frank betrays them all. But where did Frank go? Well, it's not where you think. 1974, Camp Madison, Texas, kids summer camp. A furloughed Delta pilot who loves helping kids shows up asking for a job. It's Frank Abagnale, now almost 30, an ex-felon on parole with the receding hairline. Now, the camp doesn't have any pilot positions, but Frank says he'll take any job at a kid's summer camp, which should have been a red flag right then and there. It's 1974, no background checks, they hire Frank on the spot as a bus driver. Within days, Frank's buying alcohol for the kids, flirting with 17-year-old girls, telling the kids that he actually wasn't just a bus driver, he's a secret management consultant. Now, camp counselor Jan Jackson was suspicious of Frank and writes to her father and mentions this creepy bus driver claiming to be a furloughed Delta pilot. Problem is, her dad is a Delta captain, and he knows Delta didn't furlough any pilots that year. Jan's father calls around Delta headquarters. Frank Abagnale? Never heard of the guy. But before the camp can act, they discover the vehicles are broken into. All of the camera equipment has gone missing. And Frank Abagnale is arrested for stealing from a kid's summer camp. So we got the greatest con artist of all time as an almost 30-year-old man caught stealing cameras from kids. Now, weeks later, the FBI shows up at Counselor Morris's house. Frank had just tried to flee the United States using a fake ID. It was Morris's Delta employee ID, a prototype card Frank had convinced him to make while at the camp. But here's the beautiful part. Now, Frank, who claims to be a master forger who made all of these documents, f***ed up the lamination so badly on the ID, trying to change his last name, that Customs grabbed him immediately. And Frank, well, he gave up Morris trying to save himself. So we got an almost 30-year-old man on parole, caught stealing cameras from kids, trying to leave the country with a fake ID made by a kid.
You know, I have to smile because people always say you're the greatest con man or the greatest confidence man.
His punishment, though, for all of this? Well, just pay back the camp and get a new parole officer. That's it. But Frank Abagnale hadn't had enough children in his life just yet. No, this is perfect. No, who is this?
Your address and drive a 2015 Ford Focus. Car warranty is expiring and you need to renew now.
You guys have the wrong number. Here's the thing though. That guy knew my name, my car, and hell, even where I lived. And here's the scary part about it. This guy probably bought it for $5 on one of those digital dossier websites to harass me and spam me. See, there are hundreds of companies collecting your personal information, your phone number, where you live, where you shop at, and they're selling it to literally anyone who pays up. Now, here's the scary part. Imagine an AI call that sounds exactly like your cousin using AI, and they're calling asking for bail money, and they know enough personal details about your life to make it all seem real. That's why I teamed up with today's sponsor, Aura. Now, to get your data off of these websites, a lot of them require you to fax in letters, no joke. But Aura, they make it easy. They track down everywhere my personal information is being sold on the web, and they force these companies to delete it. Now, here's the best part about it. Aura keeps monitoring my data constantly, so if my info pops up on the dark web or gets exposed in some data breach, they alert me right away so I can do something about it, like change my password, all before the scammers get to it. Now, I've been using Aura for a couple of weeks now, and watching my digital footprint shrink, I just gotta say, it's pretty satisfying, I'm not gonna lie. Now, Aura bundles everything, all for what competitors charge for just one. Try Aura for 14 days for free with my link below. Seriously, just seeing how much of your personal information is out there online being sold, it's pretty shocking, I'm not gonna lie. 1974, Frank calls his parole officer, Jim Blackman. Frank's got great news. He had just landed his dream job, the director of recreation at the local orphanage. Here's the thing though, Jim Blackman, the parole officer, used to work at that same exact orphanage, and he knew that that job required a master's degree. Blackman drops everything, drives down to Frank to figure out what the hell is even going on. On the wall, Columbia University master's degrees in social services. On his desk, pilot photos of Frank dressed up to the nines. And that's when Frank confesses to Jim Blackman. He wasn't just the recreation director, he was actually placing the foster children into their homes. Now, we don't know what happened to those kids. We don't know what homes he sent them to. We don't even know if his decision even ruined lives. All that we know is that Frank just couldn't stop. Blackman should have sent him back to prison. I mean, we got fake credentials, lying, we got kids. But instead, much like Reverend Underwood, Blackman chooses forgiveness for Frank and ordered him to leave the job quietly. So after being caught placing foster kids into homes with fake credentials, Jim Blackman just moves Frank into his garage to just keep a closer eye on him.
At 31, Frank Abagnale is debonair, rich, successful, and one of the most demanded speakers in the country.
Do you think he's able to relate to young people like yourself?
Yes, and I guess I have a lot of feelings for him.
He gets up to $2,500 to speak for a couple of hours, but he goes to schools free.
So, that's Frank with the children. Now let's look at those legendary crimes from the movie, the ones that have made Frank Abagnale so famous. Turns out, he sucked at those too.
And by the time I was 21, I'd written about $2.5 million worth of bad checks.
Here's the actual number, $1,400. Not a million, thousand. 10 fake Pan Am checks, all written out to mom and pop shops, all ending in 16 cents for some reason.
Example, if I had truly walked into a dry cleaner and the mom and pop were in the back and went to get something and the register drawer had been open and there were cash in it, I would have never taken that cash because I looked at that as like stealing and stealing from them. But I could justify walking in a bank by saying to myself, this is a bank that has billions of dollars. I'm going to write a $500 check.
Every single victim was a small business. But here's the best part. Look at the name on all of the fake checks that he wrote. It's his real name. The mastermind who claimed to have fooled the FBI and Interpol for years used his actual legal name on every forged check.
The number that's most often printed associated with you is 8 different identities. Give me the identity.
Arrested as Frank Abagnale, booked as Frank Abagnale, because that's the name on the goddamn checks. Frank claims he was on the run for years.
But to me, it was kind of very lonely, despairing life, constantly being on the run all the time for 5 years.
The reality? 5 days from warrant to arrest. Now, Frank claims that major newspapers covered his arrest. They followed his every move, the New York Times.
The New York Times, in a period of 5 years, wrote a syndicated column about me in which the New York Times referred to me as the Skyway Man.
Here's the actual coverage of it. Page 34, next to an ad for canned sausage. But I hear you. What about Europe? What about those years as this international criminal?
What did happen was that Frank saw European capitals in high style, a style that seemed to suit him.
Now the story goes, Frank fled off to Europe, became this international criminal, lived like a James Bond villain.
A lot of people say, yeah, but you know, you became a very famous thief before you were old enough to drink. You were wanted in 26 foreign countries and 50 U.S. states. Well, yeah, I did a lot of things that got a lot of attention, probably because they'd never been done before.
Here's what actually happened. August 1969, Frank flees off to Europe after betraying Reverend Underwood. He writes about $1,000 in bad checks. Frank steals a Fiat in France, drives up to Sweden. He meets Jan Hillman, a Swedish mechanic. Now Frank shows up in his pilot uniform, and right off of the bat, Hillman trusts him. So Hillman rents Frank a brand new Volvo, which Frank ends up stealing and drives back down to France. So Frank's driving stolen cars across Europe, writing bad checks, running from the police, and he stops in the middle of all of this to speak at an elementary school as a real Pan Am pilot on career day. Of course he does. So after 3 weeks in Europe on the run, Frank's arrested and sentenced to 3 months in Perpignan prison in France. Now, Frank says he was arrested only one time in his life.
I was actually arrested just once in my life when I was 21 years old by the French police.
Here's arrests 2 through 9.
The prison that I'm about to describe to you is done without the least bit of exaggeration. The building was built in the 17th century, so there were no electricity, plumbing. I was placed in a cell that was exactly 5 feet by 5 feet by 5 feet. I'm 6 foot tall. I spent 6 months there, went from 198 pounds to 109 pounds, caught double pneumonia, suffered vitamin deficiency.
Now, for 40 years, Frank tells the story of this horrific French prison. Now, remember this. We'll come back to it. Now, remember Jan Hillman, the mechanic who trusted Frank, let him borrow the Volvo? Now, Swedish court said Frank owed him $17,000. But Jan Hillman, to this day, has not seen a nickel of it.
And all of that money has been returned. No one has out any money from those crimes. The only one I didn't pay back was the hooker, because I felt the lesson was well worth the money, so I didn't pay.
And he's just one of dozens of people Frank owes a ton of money to. So if Frank was this incompetent, how the did he become a millionaire?
And that's why a watch like this is so important to me.
Well, it's very simple. Frank just rewrote history.
I was the chief resident pediatrician of a Georgia hospital.
When I was 19, I passed the bar in Louisiana and practiced law.
I flew more than 1,000,000 miles for free.
Taught as a professor of sociology, as a PhD.
For 50 years, Frank's told these stories. Reporters tried to expose him. Nobody listened. Trapped in small-town newspapers, buried in microfilm archives with no internet, no way to connect any of the dots. So Frank, he just kept talking. Until 2021. Alan Logan did what no other reporter could have done before. He had collected every buried story, every forgotten expose through the decades, and connected them all. And all of those journalists' work from the 1980s, oh boy, was it devastating. Let me show you what they found.
At the age of 18, I was the chief resident pediatrician of a Georgia hospital where I practiced medicine for over a year.
I supervised 7 interns on the midnight to 8 shift.
Have you had any medical training?
No medical training.
Reporter Ira Perry called the hospital that Frank worked at in 1978, and here's what they said about Frank Abagnale. We don't have any interns or residents, never had. This always makes me laugh. This guy's story gets better every time he tells it.
I would have been a gynecologist, but at 18 I didn't know any better.
So no licensing, no payroll, no records, nothing about Frank Abagnale.
At the time, Louisiana really didn't require a law degree to be a lawyer. Took the bar, passed the bar, and went to work for then Attorney General P.F. Permian in the civil division of his state court, where I tried civil cases for the state for about a year.
Now, Frank told this story on Carson in 1978, and Louisiana attorneys immediately complained to the Bar Association. Why? Because the district attorney Frank claimed to work for, Frank couldn't even pronounce his name right. So the Bar Association went and verified by hand every person who had ever attempted to take the bar, passed the bar, and Frank Abagnale wasn't on that list.
Pan Am says they estimate that between the ages of 16 and 18, I flew more than 1 million miles for free.
Flew more than 1 million miles for free.
Million miles for free.
Million miles. 1 million miles.
Million miles.
Pan Am says that their records show that I flew over 3 million miles between my 16th and 18th birthday.
It was 3 flights. Pan Am security director wrote about Frank in 1982 and said, "I am sorry not to have the time or the inclination to rebuke the same drivel this individual has been peddling for years." 3 flights, not 300.
I went on to Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah, where I taught as a professor of sociology as a PhD. Wasn't difficult. Read one chapter ahead of my students. They never knew the difference.
BYU's response? We can find no trace that Frank Abagnale was ever associated with Birmingham Young University. And the picture that Frank uses to show that he was an actual professor at BYU, if you notice on the desk, there's a can of Coke. And that design of the can of Coke didn't come out until 1977. So Frank claims he was a doctor at 18 years old in 1966, a lawyer at 19 years old in 1967, and a professor at 20 years old in 1968. So there's no reports, no evidence, no witnesses, nothing. Now, Frank claims the reason for this is that BYU, the hospital, the attorney's office, they destroyed all of the records of his presence because they were so embarrassed by what he had done. But one piece of evidence disproves this entire story. Frank Abagnale's own inmate record card. He was in jail this entire time. 50 years, thousands of speeches, millions of dollars made, all based on a resume that never existed. And then Frank took this lie, wrapped it up, and sold it to Hollywood. It's 1980, the book Catch Me If You Can hits the shelves, becomes a bestseller within 3 weeks. Now, Frank and Stan Redding, the co-writer, spent several 8-hour days writing this book together. Now, Stan Redding was a respected police journalist at the time, and he had said he had seen file cabinets full of evidence from the FBI verifying all of Frank's crimes. Except, there was no file cabinet, there was no evidence. Stan just took Frank at his word. But when people started asking questions about the story, well, Frank now had the perfect scapegoat. Frank would say Stan Redding wrote the book without ever talking to him. That's them reviewing manuscripts together. I guess Stan must have been a really quiet guy. Want to fact check this story with Stan? Well, he died about 40 years ago, and Frank's been blaming a dead man ever since. And that book that is full of lies was now about to become a Hollywood blockbuster. It's 2002, Catch Me If You Can hits the theaters, massive hit. You got Spielberg directing, DiCaprio starring. Frank's story goes global. And while at first Frank would brag about his involvement with these A-list celebs.
So I went out and literally spent about 3 days with Leo at his home. Constantly, he was following me around with a recorder. He was taking notes.
I met with Frank, who is quite an interesting person.
Obviously, I've enjoyed my experience of dealing with people like Steven Spielberg and Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hanks. They have been wonderful to me. They have been wonderful to my children. They've been wonderful to my family.
Frank stated he even got a cameo.
They put me in a cap and a big coat and put me in a night scene playing a French policeman who goes up to arrest Leo in one of the final scenes of the movie.
But when people started to question the story's accuracy, well, Spielberg would at least admit,
well, all of the scams, meaning all of the imposter side of Frank Abagnale, all of his scams are all true. I took some license with Jeff Nathanson, the writer, dramatically.
And the scams Spielberg thought were true? Yeah, those never happened. And Frank tried to do his own damage control. On his website in 2002 posting, it has been reported that I had written $10 million in bad checks. The actual amount was $2.5 million. Number one, nobody ever said it was $10 million. Frank invented critics to argue with. It was $1,400, not millions. He just makes it up. And by 2006, Frank went completely nuclear, stating,
I didn't have a lot to do with the making of the movie. Well, it was amazing because I didn't have a lot to do with the movie.
I had very little to do with the movie.
Didn't have a lot to do with the movie.
I had very little to do with the film.
I didn't have a lot to do with the movie.
As many of you know, I had absolutely nothing to do with the movie. I made no money from the movie. I was not involved in the movie.
Frank's literally in the movie.
Scamming people is what makes it really amazing.
Now, Frank loves to quote Spielberg on why he made Catch Me If You Can. And Frank's version of the quote goes like this.
Steven Spielberg made the movie. He loved the redemption story. He said, well, I waited 20 years to see what the real Frank Abagnale did with his life before I immortalized him on film. Steven Spielberg did a wonderful job. He loved the redemption side of a story.
He loved the redemption side of the story.
He really liked the redemption. Steven Spielberg has told me many times, I made the movie about your life because I love the redemption side.
But the actual quote? I committed to directing Catch Me If You Can principally because Frank Abagnale did things that were the most astonishing scams I had ever heard. I mean, he's literally rewriting Spielberg's own words. I think deep down, Frank knows that without these fake scams that are essentially his entire life story, Spielberg wouldn't have touched this story with the 10-foot pole. And Frank can't deal with the fact that his whole life revolves around a fake fraud. And he tries to use Spielberg to rewrite it as that it's not about the cons, it's actually about the redemption. Which in my opinion, it's like, you can't even quote people honestly about your own dishonesty. But I guess old habits die hard. 1983, Frank's charging thousands for speeches.
Today, I do over 200 speaking engagements a year. Frank W. Abagnale and Associates last year grossed over $10.5 million.
And after the speeches, fans line up one by one, and Frank, he spots his marks. He offers them signed books and slips in his business card. 2 days later, calls, and she tells Frank she had loved the book. Frank knows she's a mark, she's bought into the story, and pitches her the exclusive VIP investment of a lifetime. Just give him $20,000 and he'll make you a ton of money. She signs the check, Frank takes the money, and he goes off and runs. Jorge Bear, a doctor, another speaking event, another mark, another $20,000 for Frank.
Frank W. Abagnale and Associates last year grossed over $10.5 million.
$10 million in revenue, like Frank's claiming, while hunting fans for $20,000 each. But the next year, Frank's investment program collapses and demands her money back. Dear, our deal fell through and I have lost a great deal of money. I am dictating this letter to my secretary as I am still out of the country. That same week, Frank was actually speaking in Louisiana and Tennessee. I own nothing, no real estate, no cars, no assets. I will pay you by March, Frank says. I actually have no money. And then after years of giving this runaround to his VIP investors, September 11th, 1991, Frank files for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. $1.6 million legally gone. Jorge never repaid it. Never repaid. And these are just the ones willing to go public. How many other doctors and bankers and executives don't want to admit that they fell for it, that they got conned by a con man teaching about cons?
Victimless in that there were no individuals that I ripped off for money, nobody's personal money I took. There really isn't anyone sitting there saying they're out the money or they lost money from this crime.
I mean, those victims, while they lost thousands, Frank's next venture would take millions. Now, Frank ends every speech the same way. Your identity has been stolen. Your credit cards are compromised. Hackers have everything.
Everyone in this room has already had your identity stolen.
And then, when everyone's terrified, he drops the solution.
Look for a credit monitoring service. There are hundreds of them. You have to vet those services. Some of them are actually Ponzi scams. Some are victimizing the victim. I use one called Privacy Guard. It's the oldest and the largest, and I've used it since the early 90s. I do use a credit monitoring firm. I've used one since the 90s called Privacy Guard.
Privacy Guard. Now, Frank claims he developed it. The guy who wrote 10 Bad Checks developed credit monitoring software.
You've heard it directly from Frank Abagnale. The best way to protect yourself from identity theft and take more control of your credit is with a credit monitoring service like Privacy Guard.
I'm sure, Frank. What is Privacy Guard? Well, in 2009, the Senate investigated them for what they called abusive marketing practices. Click a discount online, you get enrolled in Privacy Guard without knowing, and you get charged monthly for years. You can call that whatever you want. Now, they've had dozens of lawsuits over the last 20 years alleging RICO fraud, mail fraud, consumer fraud, wire fraud. They've had to pay out over $45 million in settlements to consumers.
Privacy Guard does two very important things. It monitors your credit 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
In 2015, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau found that Privacy Guard, that Frank promotes as sending credit scores to everyone, they were actually sending customers made-up numbers, fake credit scores. 20 years later, Frank still promotes this as the greatest thing he's ever invented. But speaking of made-up numbers, one of Frank's favorite numbers, aside from the ones he's just made up, is his IQ.
By the time I had reached the age of 16 and the 10th grade, an IQ of 140.
Yeah, that's pretty high.
I had an IQ of about 151.
That doesn't even make sense.
By the time I was 16, I had an IQ of about 140.
Nothing was adding up. And that's the thing about Frank. He loves bragging about the numbers that live in his head, the numbers that no one could ever fact check. But that's not the only thing Frank likes to make up. Frank says he has 21 patents.
I have developed technologies used by 78% of the banks in the world today, earned me millions of dollars in royalties and patents for those technologies.
There isn't a single patent under Frank's name at all. Frank sells pens.
Yeah, so I developed what is known today as the Uniball 207.
He did it. He's literally just a spokesperson.
And even the pen you use can help. To learn more, visit Secure Your Signature.
Frank says his signature is on every payroll check in the United States, while he's giving speeches at the Marriott in Toledo.
I think it's very important when I publicly go out and speak to tell people, you know, the real story as it is and what actually happened.
But what is that real story? Well, researcher Alan Logan uncovered the truth in 2025. This story has never been told before. Now, the family has stayed quiet about this for 50 years, and Alan Logan spent time tracking down these victims that Frank never mentions. Trinidad, California, 1965. A family-run motel. Now, the owners have moved from LA so their two kids could grow up by the ocean. Now, Frank shows up, says he's a newlywed doctor heading to San Francisco for their honeymoon. Now, the family of the motel throws him a wiener roast to celebrate. And that night, their 7-year-old gets sick with a nasty fever. And Frank tells them, "I'm a doctor, let me help." Frank goes to his car, pulls out his medical bag, and begins performing a full physical on the 7-year-old boy. After prodding and probing, he tells the parents, just give the kid aspirin. And the parents were so thankful to be in Dr. Abagnale's hands. The next day, Frank pays by check and he leaves. The check bounces. Days later, a truck shows up at the motel and delivers a brand new crib that Frank had bought for the family, with another bad check. And that's when the police informed the family that Frank wasn't a doctor, but a 17-year-old con artist on the run, and all of the checks he'd written, they had bounced. Frank was cosplaying as a doctor at 17 years old, diagnosing people. Now, the father at the motel would have to pay everyone back, about $400 in 1965, about $3,500 today, all from his own pocket. And 50 years later, the wife told Alan Logan, Frank had never contacted us, he never apologized, never offered to pay restitution. So we have the Trinidad family, the Parks family, Jan Hillman, Jorge, and these are just the ones willing to talk. How many others are out there too embarrassed to admit that they fell for Frank Abagnale, the man who teaches you to not fall for Frank Abagnale?
Of course, like any criminal, sooner or later you get caught.
Sooner or later you get caught.
It's like any criminal, sooner or later you get caught. You get caught. Any criminal, sooner or later is ready to get caught.
For 50 years, journalists have tried to crack Frank Abagnale. They'd present evidence, show contradictions, point out impossibilities in his story. And Frank's response was always the same: deflect, deny, run.
Well, for 6 years, we evaded the FBI, pretending to be a pilot, a doctor, a professor. But how were you able to do that if you were like sitting in prison the whole time? Supposedly doing all these adventures.
Came over a period of time, not predicted in the movie. You know, it had nothing to do. I didn't write the book. I didn't make the movie. It didn't have anything to do with the play.
Now, Frank never cracked, never admitted anything until 2024. Now, a journalist at the Wall Street Journal presses Frank on the facts of the story, and for some reason this time, Frank cracks. Frank's response: I impersonated a doctor, but I did not actually work in a hospital. 50 years of that lie. I impersonated a lawyer, but I wasn't an attorney. I did not pass the bar. 50 years of that lie. Stan Redding took the French prisons, and they were bad, but he made them seem incredibly horrible. 50 years of that lie. So Frank, in his mid-70s, finally admits the truth that journalists have been trying to say for decades, but in a place where no one would ever see it. On someone's Substack, behind a $7 a wall. In an article with 2 comments. Even his honesty comes with an asterisk. Now, I know what some people are thinking. Well, Frank Abagnale still is the greatest con artist ever. The story itself was the con. That's what Frank wants you to think. If the con is the story, well, that means there's no real victims. The story never happened. We don't have to think about Paula Parks, the Trinidad family, Jorge. We don't have to wonder why he won't pay any of these people back, or hell, even apologize, or why he's still lying to this day. This isn't just a story about a fake tale. It's a story about real people who are still waiting for Frank Abagnale to do the one thing he always claimed that he did: change.
But having found he couldn't live down his notorious reputation, he found a way to live with it. He's retired, but not reformed.
A con artist is part of one's personality.
It's the only honest thing Frank Abagnale ever said. Facing a litany of hacking charges across the world, Dylan Wheeler, a kid who'd been hacking since the age of 12, was a fugitive on the run. With a group of teenagers, he had stolen $100 million from Epic Games, Valve, Microsoft, hell, even the US military. And while the other teens were now locked up, Dylan had escaped to Poland. But now he was broke. But from a group of guys he had just met, he had heard the security cameras at the local Polish bank were pretty lax, enough to plan a robbery. At 3 a.m., they lined up at the bank with no one in sight. And as they got inside and Dylan shut down the security system, they loaded up their bags with loot and walked out like it never happened. But as they got home to count their stash and dream of what they could buy, they had failed to realize there was a hidden camera in the wall that had seen it all. And Dylan Wheeler, the infamous kid hacker on the run, was finally caught. What started out as a gang of teenagers hacking their Xboxes to play pirated games for free would spiral down the path of corporate espionage, breaking into the US military, an $18 million FIFA fraud that went unnoticed for years. And it all starts here with the Xbox. Now, people freaked out when the Xbox 360 was released, not because of better games or graphics, but this thing had way better security. Why? Well, because hackers broke the security on the original Xbox, which sprouted a huge community of hackers who modded and exploited and pirated all things Xbox, and Microsoft was pretty pissed. So with the Xbox 360 release, they spent millions of dollars to ensure no one was gonna pirate or mod any game, and they actually hailed it as unhackable. And for over 40 years, the Xbox hacking world just could not break the system, meaning no one could make mods for it, until someone found the missing link. At an e-waste recycler, Rowdy was searching for Xbox DVD drives. You know, as a hobby, he'd like to repair them, kind of like a freak. But after an hour of scrounging through the piles of plastic scraps on the floor, his eyes lit up. He had found an Xbox so rare, it actually had no business even being there. The Xbox 360 development kit. Now, this is a huge deal because a dev kit is a special console used to make video games. Microsoft leases them out to developers, so if you're an Xbox hacker, that's what you want. But let me just say, these dev kits are super rare. I mean, you have to provide industry references, resumes, hell, even sign an NDA. And to top it all off, reselling a dev kit is not allowed. But if these are so rare, how did these get here, Vince? Well, the Red Ring of Death.
Microsoft's Red Ring of...
The Red Ring of Death, one of the biggest recalls in Xbox history. And while these were all going to be crushed off, Rowdy gave these dev kits a new home in the hands of some of the most experienced hackers in the Xbox scene. As a child prodigy, David Pecora had been programming since he was in diapers. When his parents got him an original Xbox for Christmas, instead of just playing with it like a normal kid, David made mods for it. But now, years later, with this unhackable Xbox 360, all he wanted was a dev kit. Because a regular Xbox you just buy at Walmart only runs signed code, which is approved from Microsoft. But a dev kit? Oh, that runs unsigned code, which could be anything David wanted. So when Rowdy hit him up with the dev kit for sale, David took all of the savings from his grandma's birthday checks and he got modding his favorite game, Halo 3. Now through the months as the mod got better, he shared his unpolished Halo mods on HaloMods.com, and people were blown away. Because this meant David had gotten a development kit, which was impossible to get. And of course, they asked him where did he get it from and how was he doing this? But David was not going to tell him. Quote, "You cannot do it. You won't know how. No one will tell you how. And even with a dev kit, you won't be able to mod. You want a dev kit? Good luck finding one." But Anthony Clark, an 18-year-old gifted programmer, knew David was kind of full of it. I mean, the kid obviously knew where to get a dev kit, so he hits him up with a little deal. Anthony would help polish his Halo 3 mod in exchange for the number of the guy who sold him that dev kit. So it's a deal. The two agree, they get working on the mod, and slowly they become friends, talking about girls in school and programming in their Halo 3 mod. That's when David found something on his dev kit that he'd only dreamed of ever finding. PartnerNet. It's where developers test their unreleased games on Xbox Live, meaning there were dozens of unreleased games that they could just play months before anyone else. I mean, for a true gamer, that's the dream. But PartnerNet isn't open to the world. It's only for licensed developers with the dev kit, and in this case, Anthony and David. To them, it felt like a secret club that they were in. But when developers noticed their unreleased games being played online, they decided to leave the two a little message the next time they logged on. Winners don't break into PartnerNet. But to Anthony and David, this wasn't a big deal. They were simply just curious about these upcoming games. It was all in the name of fun, right? But outside of stealing games off PartnerNet, the Halo community was amazed with how far their mod had come, although bummed that no one could even use it because, again, no one had a dev kit. But that would all change in 2009. In a presentation that rocked Microsoft, two hackers revealed that the Xbox 360 security had finally been broken, the JTAG exploit. Within a simple modification, a regular Xbox 360 can have the abilities of a dev kit to run unsigned code. Or in other words, mods and piracy for everyone. Within days, thousands of people start JTagging their Xboxes, and Microsoft was just freaking out. Because for Anthony and David, potentially now, anyone could use their mods like Infinite Ammo and Super Jump to cheat online. And people pay good money to cheat online. So in a genius move, they sell access to their mod for $100 an hour, and kids line up with Daddy's Amex ready to max it out. The two start raking in about $8,000 a day, all via PayPal. Remember, these are kids making this kind of money. But for David, making this fast cash just didn't do much to him. According to him, money was just never the motivation. Rather, he craved that high of stealing those unreleased games. It was a feeling that he just couldn't even put a price on. But now everything had been stolen off of the PartnerNet, so to get his hands on even more, David invited more hackers into the group now, the Xbox Underground. At PAX 2010, developers were showing off all of their upcoming games, but Justin May, a member of the Underground, was on a mission. You see, his Xbox account had been permabanned. He had emailed and called, but with no response back. And without his gamertag, Justin was a nobody. So, with nothing left to lose, he was going to ask the director of Xbox Live to unban him in person. And we have it on video.
I actually came to PAX primarily for this panel. Can you unban my gamertag, please? I played Forza 3 early.
I'm sorry, you should do that.
However, again, but I won't make.
There are some punishments for which there's sort of no recourse.
Yeah, the plan fails. But Justin wasn't just gonna walk away empty-handed from PAX. The next day at the convention, Justin was stalking the Atomic Games booth. He had saw the golden shrine on the pedestal, a 360 dev kit loaded with their unreleased game. It was a beaut. Atomic had spent over $6 million developing it. And Justin? He was just gonna take it. As they turn around, Justin opens up his laptop, plugs it into the dev kit, but then security starts to walk by, and Justin bolts off. And of course, they chase right after him. But being a true Xbox gamer, he runs out of breath, and they tackle him down. So now with tears in his eyes, he told security it was all a big misunderstanding. It was his Wi-Fi not working, and he was connecting to the dev kit to get on the internet. But yeah, the stolen source code was on his laptop. Justin was because Atomic Games works with the FBI. So now this whole matter, yeah, it became a national security issue. Within an hour, they raid his home, confiscate all of his Xboxes, and charge a kid with receiving stolen trade secrets. But then the rumors come out that when Justin was arrested, he was begging the cops that if he was let go, well, he could name hackers higher up than him who stole way more than just one little game. But yeah, the judge didn't really care. Justin would get the death sentence. For a gamer. He got a court order that he was banned from playing his Xbox for 18 months. And now David knew if he was gonna get his hands on more pre-release games, he needed to be a lot quieter about it. Now, with David's growing reputation, opportunity started just coming to him. And Super Day, also known as Dylan Wheeler, brought him the opportunity of a lifetime. I've come across a leaked form database with thousands of login credentials. Several emails belonging to Epic Games employees thought we could work together on this. Super Day. Now, a lot of people reuse their passwords, and hackers know that. Now, it's the biggest reason why leaks like this even happen, because of just reused passwords. Now, several emails in this leak were at epicgames.com. So if just one of those employees reused their password, David could enter Epic Games and steal from one of the biggest video game developers in the world. But this kind of seemed too good to be true, because who really was Dylan? He said he'd been hacking since the age of 12, and that he went to high school in Australia, and that he just come out of nowhere with this. I mean, was the kid a Fed? But these logins did work, although the minute they logged into Epic Games, there was another problem. These accounts were just the IT support staff at Epic Games, meaning they couldn't see any of these upcoming projects or games, or as Dylan said, what a waste. They just fix printers and reset passwords. David's a smart cookie, because he thinks, well, we have access to their emails, let's search for the word password in those emails. And that's when they come across the granddaddy of corporate IT fuck-ups. A master password list for every employee at Epic Games, all on a Word document just for anyone to look at. And all of this because one employee reused their password. Okay, so my advice, just check to see if your private information's been leaked in a data breach. And right now, you can check that using today's sponsor, Guardio. Guardio is a browser extension and mobile app that provides real-time protection against threats that thrive in that security gap standard solutions can't even help with. It protects against the latest malware and hijackers that are spread everywhere online. From downloading a game mod to clicking a malicious ad on Facebook disguised as legitimate software, Guardio knows to detect and block them. Now, we already saw that two-factor authentication won't keep us safe if we just happen to download the wrong file. Sophisticated hijackers can bypass two-factor authentication and take over every account you are logged into. But with Guardio's in-house developed methods to detect malicious files, it'll block them before they have any chance to take over your accounts. And with that cross-platform identity monitoring, you'll get real-time alerts when your data has been breached. Once installed, it will run an initial